All right, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's give it up for our panelists today, ladies and gentlemen, please. It's good to see the church so packed. One of the greatest pleasures of my life is the privilege of welcoming you to the annual Hutchins Forum here at the Old Whaling Church on Martha's Vineyard. Now, our forum is hosted by the chairman of the board of the Hutchins Center at Harvard, and that is Glenn Hutchins and his lovely wife, Debbie, right there in the front row. Their generosity makes this and so many other things that we are able to do possible. The best thing about Glenn's commitment to our work in African American, African, and now Afro-Latin American studies is the pleasure of being able to engage with him intellectually, an engagement that stems from a deep and abiding friendship that's both rewarding and sustaining for me personally. This brother has donated an extraordinary amount of financial support for the field of Black studies, far more than any other single individual in history, Black or white. And I ask you to give it up for Glenn Hutch. Stand up, Hutch. Stand up, man. Stand up, Debbie. Stand up. That's amazing. This is our 22nd year doing this panel discussion, and every year it gets better and better. So it's also my pleasure to greet the audience at home because we're continuing the successful partnership that we began last year with the PBS NewsHour, and we're live streaming this event. So welcome one and all to our forum today here on the beautiful Fantasy Island, also known as Martha's Vineyard. Now, I want to give a special acknowledgement to the members of the Hutchins Center National Advisory Board who are in the audience today and who make our work possible. So when I say your name, please stand up. Glenn Hutchins, the chairman of our board. Shahara Ahmad Llewellyn. Bennett Ashley. Carol and Frank Biondi. Peggy Cooper Kafritz. Virgis Colbert. Nancy Garvey. Jeremy Henderson. Mitch and Frida Kapoor, Christina Weiss-Lurie, Gerald Pearl, Larry Thompson, and Davis Weinstock. Thank you, my friends, for continuing your support for the dreams and the visions of the Hutchins Center. Now today, as you can see, we've assembled 4 phenomenal panelists, plus my dear friend, the respondent, the brilliant Du Bois Professor of the Social Sciences, Larry Bobo, to address the topic of race and the race to the White House. Now, the topic is on all of our minds, not only because of the blistering and bruising diatribes of one particular candidate, but also, on the other hand, positively, by the soaring rhetoric of our First Lady and our President at the most recent Democratic National Convention. Didn't they both knock it out of the park? Now, additionally, the black vote, quote unquote, has been a constant source either of anxiety or celebration or both for one candidate or another throughout the primaries and now as we head toward the general election. The steady replay of police shootings of Black men and Black women, as well as the senseless killing of police officers in cruelly misguided response, has also kept this topic front and center. At times, ladies and gentlemen, to be honest, there's so much shouting on this subject that we seem to be engaged not in a national dialogue on race, but rather in multiple monologues on race. I also wonder whether it will ever be possible to determine just how much the race of our president has played in the discussion. When the First Lady spoke so eloquently and movingly about watching her beautiful Black daughters play on the lawn of a house built by slaves The historic importance of the Obama presidency was cast in the sharpest relief. But as we look past these last 8 years, we also have to consider in what ways the topic is bigger than our first black president. How can we come to understand what drives the bitter anti-black racism that still divides us and even motivates some of our electorate? And then, how can we work together to eliminate this racism? We have a long road ahead of us in this investigation, and today, my dear friend Charlayne Hunter Galt is going to lead us through it. To borrow a phrase from President Obama, there is, quote, no one more qualified. Charlayne has won 2 Emmys and 2 Peabody Awards, and in 1986, she was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists, which inducted her into its Hall of Fame in the year 2005. Charlayne is the author of the poignant memoir, In My Place, the author of News Out of Nowhere, Uncovering Africa's Renaissance, and most recently, To the Mountaintop, My Journey Through the Civil Rights Movement. In her current program on PBS, Race Matters, Charlayne brings the full force of her experience to dig deep into the workings of race in the American landscape. Now, before I turn the podium over to Charlayne, let me share with you 2 additional ideas, one current and one historic, which for me get to the heart of the topic, race and the race to the White House. The first is from the New York Times columnist Roger Cohen, who wrote the following words earlier this month, and I quote, in no other nation is tomorrow so vivid, yesterday so pale. Where you came from yields to American rebirth. There is no real America to take back, as Trump insists, because America's many-hued reality is a ceaseless becoming. It is a mosaic in which Barry Soetoro, his boyhood name in Indonesia, can become a Barry Obama, and at last, a proud Barack Hussein Obama. The country where, as Obama said in 2004, a skinny kid with a funny name finds his place. Yet this America, Cohen continues, whose fault lines Obama the hybrid stepped across 12 years ago, is perhaps more divided than ever as his presidency winds down. There was something about Obama's blackness, his intellectualism, his cool distillation of problems that was intolerable to a wide swatch of the white working class, angered by lost jobs, lost wars, lost security, and lost pride. These Americans, Cohen concludes, have felt left behind, unquote. Demagogues classically thrive, ladies and gentlemen, in environments such as these. Rather than despair, let us look back to the prophetic and bracingly realist words of the Reverend Jesse Jackson at the 1988 Democratic National Convention, and I quote, "It gets dark sometimes, but the morning comes. Don't you surrender. Suffering breeds character, character breeds faith. In the end, faith will not disappoint. You must not surrender. You may or may not get there, but just know that you're qualified, and you hold on and hold out. We must never surrender. America will get better and better." And then in classic Jesse fashion, he ended, "Keep hope alive." Keep hope alive. And no one among us, ladies and gentlemen, keeps the hope of ending anti-black racism alive more effectively through her Race Matters series on PBS than does our moderator in her never-ending and noble quest to find race solutions. Give it up for my dear friend, Charlayne Hunter Galt.
Thank you very much, Professor Gates. Your check is in the mail. You've really put a context on our discussion today. Thank you very much for that. And I think, like the rest of you, including Professor Gates, I'm hearing descriptions of this presidential campaign that are especially jarring or maybe accurate, whatever. But thanks to our panelists, we have some names, like a mild one. Our panelist, Leah Wright-Rigueur, calls this period insane. No, that's you who called it insane. She didn't copy it from you. But Leah called it a curious, historic moment. And there were a lot of others who called it bizarre and toxic. I've called it toxic myself. But underlying a lot of such descriptions is what, in my view, as Skip just indicated, America's most unresolved issue, and that is racism, which is also, as you surely would know, a burning issue in this campaign. And that is what our panel is going to focus on, as promoted on our posters all over the vineyard. And our panel this year has mostly familiar faces, as I see familiar faces in this audience. Some of them have been here before. We have one exception. And you can read their full bios in your program because they are simply amazing. But I'm not going to go into all of them in the interest of time because I can see most of you are chomping at the bit to ask questions of this panel, as I will shortly. So here goes. And by the way, if I leave anything out, you can say, oh, you forgot to mention such and such, okay? If I don't give you your just due in the introduction. So here goes. We're welcoming back Charles Blow, New York Times op-ed columnist and CNN commentator, among others. We're also welcoming back, shall I say, Donna Brazile. Now, Donna, that's not also because of your past performance, but because of your new position as interim chair of the Democratic National Committee. We got a little nervous when she took that appointment, but she never fails, and we are so glad you could make it, and congratulations to you and all the best. We also welcome back Armstrong Williams, a well-known conservative voice, columnist, radio host, who currently has his own daily radio show, The Right Side, with Armstrong Williams on Sirius XM, while serving as CEO of the international public relations firm, the Graham Williams Group. Is that right? Yeah, you were looking at me kind of funny there. I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. And finally, for the first time, we welcome Leah Wright-Rigueur, who is an assistant professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and the author Leah, that means you're going to get 2 applause because you're new here today, because I want to finish this thing, because this book is what drew me to Leah in the first place. She's the author of The Loneliness of the Black Republican, which was published by Princeton in 2015. And her research and commentary has been all over the place, electronic and print media. I don't know if she tweets like DeRay McKesson did on our last panel last year. If you notice, DeRay had his head down the whole time, and I thought he was just tired because he'd just gotten out of jail and came straight here. But he was tweeting, so Leah, I don't know if you tweet, but feel free. And that's our panel. So I want to begin with Charles Blow, who spends a lot of his time, oh, who did I, no, he gets a special introduction. He's already been introduced by our distinguished leader here, and so you told about him, right? You didn't tell about him? Yes, you did. You told him a little bit, but I'm only doing a little bit on all of them, too. But we have our distinguished professor, if you want to know, Lawrence Bobo, also known as Larry, who provides us with a wonderful wrap-up at the end of his service, who comes to us by way of Harvard University. Also, want to applaud
for the last time.
So, Charles.
Yes.
Give us a sense of what the polling data and the surveys are saying about race and racism in this campaign, and just how different is it from previous campaigns?
Well, first, when you first said my name and everybody said Bobo, I thought they were saying, oh no. Well, I guess you have to take it in two phases, right? So you have to take the primaries, which were fascinating in terms of race, mostly on the Democratic side, where you had more culturally diverse electorate, and you saw a lot of the Obama coalition split. The young people split from the blacks and Hispanics, which had been the Obama coalition that gave him the boost over Hillary. The young people went with Sanders. The overwhelmingly, particularly in the South, African Americans went with Hillary Clinton. And because most of the southern states were stacked early in the primary season, it meant that it gave her a boost of momentum and a lead that was almost insurmountable as he got into the later stages of the campaign. And that's a fascinating thing, because you would think that Sanders would have his message of income inequality, the idea of the college issue, dealing with mass incarceration, all of that should have traction with Southern black voters. It did not have the kind of traction that you would imagine. And on one level, it's kind of disconcerting. On another level, it makes perfect sense, in the sense that black voters are like any other voters. Nobody is a saint. And in fact, campaign promises are very far removed from your daily experiences, and people come around to your black churches every season and they offer and say they're going to do a million things, and they turn around, and when the election's over, you don't see them again, number one, and number two, what they said was going to happen doesn't happen. And so people basically just throw both the pros and cons of everybody into a hopper. What ended up happening was that familiarity won out over policy, I believe, on some level. People in the South felt like they knew the Clintons, the good of them and the bad of them, right? There was no one that I can even think of in the South who didn't have some sort of personal story or some, second, third removed story about the Clintons. My mother's like, I remember the first time I met Bill Clinton, because cousin so-and-so used to work in the state government. He used to come home with him sometimes. I mean, it's so casual, this idea of them, and they've put in a lot of that kind of retail politics work over many decades of both standing up for issues and going to speak everywhere. So it's hard to find a black college in the South where where Bill or Hillary has not given a commencement address. Really difficult. And so when you turn back to Bernie Sanders, and what he was saying was, I have a history of standing up for these issues, but because it was all northern, it was in Chicago, and he had done a lot of work in D.C., and black people in the South were like, yeah, but I don't want a long-distance love affair, right? I need to see some record of you having come to the South. And so I think that was a disconnect. Then you have this, on the second part of this is Clinton versus Trump. And Trump has done everything imaginable. You could not have written a better way to alienate non-white voters than what Trump has done. And so, in the most recent polls, he's getting somewhere between 0 and 1% of the black vote, which is almost statistically impossible. So it must be slightly higher, but I don't even know what it means. I think I know those people, the 1%. Okay. And so what has ended up happening is that he is facing weakness in some traditionally very safe Republican states. You have South Carolina now where people are suggesting it may go to Hillary. You have him having trouble in Utah. Utah should never go to Hillary.
Okay, but you're getting, let me just ask you to just back up a couple of steps.
Because I go deep on the numbers.
Yeah, no, but I'm coming to that. But what I'm curious about is we are all seized with the discussion of race in this election, and you mentioned the Clintons. But I'm just wondering, is this the first time that we've had this kind of attention focused on race? I mean, let's just look back a little bit. Is this unusual?
Well, not necessarily, right? So
that's what I wanted to know.
So The black vote is most powerful in the primaries. It's much less powerful in the general election because.
I disagree.
Wait 1 second. And let me tell you why that is, right? It particularly in southern states, you have many southern states where the majority of the primary electorate is African American, the majority of the vote. So whoever wins the black vote in the primaries wins the nomination, it wins that state in the South. So that's a tremendous amount of power. Those same states where they are the majority of primary voters, they are almost always drowned out by the majority of white voters in the general election. So those are all of the southern states, all the way from South Carolina, all the way over to Texas, right? So that means that no matter, so that's just the truth. Come on, Donna.
We're getting
So-
there.
so-
We're getting there, Donna. Just
Let Donna pipe in, because
Yeah,
she
no,
can't
no,
sit
let
still.
Donna help
there.
the brother out. Let Donna help the brother out. Please, please.
I knew this was, Donna, hold on, because I want to ask you the same question. Your take and your view on how different race is playing in this campaign compared with others, because people do tend to think, and maybe it's because we're in the moment, that this is the worst we've ever seen. Now, what is your take
Well,
on
I mean,
that?
I can go back to 1824, 1896. There are so many elections in our history where race has been front and center, and the way in which political campaigns and candidates dealt with race was always to basically make it an issue. You can say, go close to the mic. I don't know. I don't want to make love to a microphone that I haven't been with before. I mean, if I'm going to step on something hot, it got to be something that's spicy, too. I don't know. I'm just making sure. But race has always been a dynamic in presidential politics from the moment that our founders left Philadelphia and could not come to any compromise to the elections that, of course, have really shaped our dynamic on race from 60 forward. Yes, this election is different. The hostility that we've seen on the campaign trail, the insults that have been hurled at people of color, not just blacks, Hispanics, and others. And I'm not going to put my friend Armstrong on the mic, on the defensive until I finish. There's no question that the road to 270, if you look at it from my point of view, it starts in the old Confederacy, the capital of the old Confederacy, Richmond. And then it makes its way in North Carolina, of course, that's a battleground state. And then whether you look at Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, when people laugh and say Hillary is only winning because they're black voters, I said, you know what, she's also winning in places where there are black voters. Ohio matters, Michigan matters, Virginia, Wisconsin. These are crucial states to getting the 270 electoral votes. So the black vote matters in a general election. I want everybody to hear that. Every vote matters in a general election, but the black vote is crucial. Think about President Obama from 2008 to 2012. Had President Obama not increased his percentage among black women in particular in those crucial battleground states, the increase of 2% of black women in those 7 battleground states up north allowed him to get 102 more electoral votes. So don't let anyone tell you that the black vote, will not play a crucial role in the road to the White House. Now, as we speak, I just want to say this. We have 154 days, 7 hours, and about 23 minutes left for the Obama presidency. And being a strong supporter of this president, one of the things I wish to accomplish is I'm going to make sure he has a strong legacy, not just in winning back the House and the Senate. I'm feeling very, very ambitious now. But we're going to pick up those two seats in the Pennsylvania Senate that will give us control of that chamber again. We're going down to Arkansas because I'm tired of a party that just want to focus on the battleground state. When you're battling politicians that want to take away your right to vote, they want to restrict your right to choose, when they are defeating all of the initiatives that will raise the minimum wage, those are battleground states. So we're not talking about states where it's just Ohio, Michigan. Every state is a battleground. And when you have families who are now finding themselves sitting on the curb, wondering if they could get back in their homes because they've been flooded again, it matters that you have people in the State House. So part of President Obama's legacy is to leave the White House in the hands of a woman, hello, and to have allies in all 50 states so we never, ever have to contest the kind of changes that we wish to see in our electorate. So every state is a battleground state. That's my message. Now, my brother here, he's a good man. I give him that. I've known Armstrong since 1980. Armstrong, I'm going to just give you a nice, fine introduction. He's passionate. He spent most of the primary season working for Dr. Ben Carson as a chief strategist and much, much, much more. I don't know what Armstrong is going to do in the general election. My door is open, Armstrong, and you know you can always, he knows my number.
Well, why don't we?
I just want to tell Armstrong there's no need to be in a party where they don't want you, where they treat you like you're a second-hand furniture, and a party that insults you each and every day.
Okay.
We have room for you in my house, Armstrong.
Okay.
Come on over. I'll cook with drinks.
All right. Armstrong.
He's my buddy.
Armstrong, Donna has done a better job introducing you than I have. But I want you to come back to my original question. And now you've heard two people talk about how awful this election is as it relates to race. Is it because of Donald Trump, and have we seen other elections where race is equally troublesome?
Thank you. So, for me, who's a proud third-generation Republican and very involved with the party, you know, I think for any democracy, you need a very strong two-party system to hold the candidates accountable. And I think Donald touched on something here. And listen, Donald Trump, even for me, I wrote an article recently for PBS, is very disappointing. I don't see how any presidential candidate cannot go to the Urban League, the NAACP, the churches, even if it's hostile. Leaders set the tone. They go into the lion's den and they face the fire and they stand it down and they take the bullets and they leave that place a better person. There's nothing to be afraid of unless you have nothing to say and nothing to make that community better. That's not who we are as a Republican Party. And so that is very disappointing. But however, we should remember this, not only just with the Bernie Sanders voters and those that are supporting Donald Trump, the things that we see in Ferguson and Baltimore, people are angry. They are mad. Something has gone terribly wrong with our two-party system. Most of us, I can't speak for most of us in this room, but most of us on the stage are pretty wealthy. I happen to be in a unique position, being the largest television owner, black television owner in the country. There are 12 minorities who own television stations in the country. I own 7 of those. Flint, Michigan, Birmingham, Alabama, South Carolina, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I will tell you, these people cannot even relate to what's going on in the political system because they're struggling so bad. Why is it that Donald Trump and the Republican Party cannot talk about, instead of attacking President Obama on issues like the birth and this other stuff, talk about the real issues? The fact that what we have to protect really is the down ticket. The things that you don't talk about, when President Obama on the issue tried to cut 10 to 15% of funding the historical black colleges and universities, it was some of the historical black colleges presidents that went to Paul Ryan and he restored the money into the budget. Those are the kind of issues that you can challenge them on the substance. Why is it that we cannot have a conversation about school vouchers, where we know that 71% of blacks in this country support vouchers, not this formula that states have to always be involved in education? Something is not working in this country. This thing about legislating criminalization instead of putting community police on the street, there is no way that a young kid selling drugs should get the same sentence that some mobster who's pushing drugs. The sentences shouldn't be the same. What we're getting away from here are the issues that impact black people and people every day. They're getting poorer and poorer and angrier and angrier. And while you may enjoy your property value, while you may enjoy your way of life, it's just a matter of time before your city is on fire until we address the issues that we're not taking care of the poor, the middle class is shrinking, and all we can talk about are two flawed and most polarizing candidates in the history of presidential politics running for office. And it's a glorifying moment for them, but for most people, they are barely surviving.
Let me just follow up with you with one quick question.
Sure.
And that is, you are a Republican, right?
Absolutely. Proud of it. Don't want to be anything else.
And you are a conservative.
Absolutely.
So what's wrong with Donald Trump not going to the NAACP or the National Association of Black Journalists or the National Urban League? What's going on? Why aren't you people who look like you talking to him?
Well, see, now I'm going to have to, listen, I don't need to be black, white, brown, or blue to make somebody understand that all votes count, that every life matters. If it's my role to have to tell someone that you have to go into these communities to be present, to hear what they have to say, then my attitude is you shouldn't be running for president in the first place.
But are you conveying that? And are other African Americans and people of color conveying that? You're Republicans, he's a Republican, he's got the nomination. Are you talking to him and are you getting to him? Who's talking to him about these issues?
No one is getting to Donald Trump. Isn't that obvious by now? It doesn't matter what their race is, okay? And it doesn't matter how many changes you make in the campaign, how many people you hire, who you bring on board. Until Donald Trump changes Donald Trump, it will always be the same. We've never seen anything like it. It's just the way it is. And Donald Trump, and you and I will agree on this, has been the same since the beginning of his campaign. He's no different. He's the same Donald Trump that the media fell in love with him, destroyed all 17 Republican candidates, and all of a sudden they decided this is a serious threat.
Okay, we'll come back. We know you're longing for Ben Carson. That's probably part of the thing that's going on with you right now, but he's out of it. So we'll come back to you in a minute. Leah Wright Rigueur, you've been following, as I said, about your great book about the history of Black Republicans. And you have said, your thesis is that Black Republicans identify with the party, but they vote their interests. Now, what are you seeing happening now, and how much of is it related to race?
So first, thank you all for having me here. As a newcomer, it's pretty exciting, and I should also say that my book is not a memoir. It is an analysis of race in the Republican Party over the course of an 80-year period, right? So these highs and these lows, and how various Republican administrations interact with civil rights, even as they're becoming increasingly hostile to the idea of race. So this is a weird and this is a peculiar presidential election, and that's what I wrote, and I really do mean this. In a number of different ways. I mean, we're coming off the end of a Black president, right? A two-term Black president. And yet we have a candidate who has taken the election to kind of comic book levels of villainy, right? Who can try and claim that he is trying to do Black outreach, but can't even say the phrase Black Lives Matter, right? So this is a serious problem. And one of the things that we have seen is that amongst kind of African American communities, amongst what little Republicans are left within the party, there has been a significant amount of just disenchantment. Right? So a significant amount of frustration. But what history tells us and what history teaches us is that this frustration isn't new. So this is a frustration that we have seen over and over and over again, especially as we're talking about people who have been minorities within their political party and then political minorities within their racial communities. So this presents quite a quite a crisis. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that when you have a candidate and when you have issues like something like Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is a symptom of a much, much greater problem, right? He is not the problem, right? And in fact, there have been a tremendous amount of comparisons, right, with figures like, say, George Wallace, or even a figure like Barry Goldwater. And I'm more apt to say that the latter figure is an accurate comparison, not because Barry Goldwater, right, is the problem. This is the 1964 presidential nominee, but because of the effect that he has on the party, right? This is the point in time when African Americans, when black voters essentially say farewell to the party of Lincoln for what amounts to forever. And we're seeing that across the board, right? So it's not just black voters who are alienated, it's Latino voters, it's Asian voters, it's LGBTQ voters, it's women voters, it is college-educated whites who are alienated right now. And so that is a symptom of something much, much bigger. And then I think to echo many of the points that the other panelists have made, we also need to try and understand the anger, right? So the anger that is coming out of the Republican base. And so I know there is an instinct, and lots of studies have actually shown that much of the base is being driven right now, the support for Donald Trump is being driven by racism. But we have to see what's underneath that racism. I think it is incredibly important to think about that, especially if we're thinking about ourselves in a kind of a democratic, right, in a democratic environment and a shifting electorate. So stop there.
Oh, wait a minute, you on a roll, girl. Because you also wrote, and I'm glad you brought up the whole issue of systemic racism, that Donald Trump's, or whatever is going on with race is a symptom and is systemic. But you also talked about how Trump gets most of the criticism, but you wrote that race has played a complex role in Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, can you explain that? And everybody be quiet now, let her do that.
So one of the things that I've written about is that in the face of black partisanship, right, so this means 95% of African American or black voters support Democratic presidential nominees, right? So this is true even before Barack Obama. We're seeing that today. Charles mentioned that staggering statistic about Donald Trump is getting between 0 to 4% of the black vote, right? And the joke is that 1%. 1%. Okay.
We're on television, so
I'm trying to do the outliers too. But the thing with that is, it obscures a much more, I think, complex and nuanced story, and one that has kind of hints of kind of intergenerational conflict, right? So part of what we're seeing, and we've seen a couple of different surveys come out, especially from young black voters, right, who are, even as they are saying, I'm going to support a candidate like Hillary Clinton, saying, I have severe and significant problems with both the history, Hillary Clinton's history, some of the policies of the Clinton administration, and I need to voice those frustrations, right? So part of what we're tapping into, even though we probably won't see it play out in this election cycle, are these fissures and these fractures that are at the bottom, right, of this kind of democratic politics and this uneasy relationship between African Americans in the Democratic Party. And these are things, I think, in a year and in a moment, an extreme moment like this, right, where we have what is essentially amounts to a one-way race, right? It is very, it's almost easy to ignore what is going on kind of both outside of the party and pushback that we're seeing within the party, especially amongst young voters.
Okay, I know Donna wants to get in here, but I'm going to ask her just to hold her peace for 1 second, because Charles, you've written about this also, that there are issues with Hillary Clinton's campaign that relate to race.
Absolutely.
And again, everybody be calm now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Try to get me in trouble. Well, I mean, listen, I think the young people have tapped into this more than older people have, and there were a couple of issues. There was the welfare reform under Bill Clinton, which Hillary supported, although she was not a voting member of Congress, so she did not vote on it. And there was the crime bill, the biggest crime bill in the history of this country, which she was not a member of Congress. She didn't vote on it, but she actively promoted it. And
But did black people actively promote it too?
The black people, many black people in the communities wanted this.
Yeah, because their communities were being destroyed by crime and drugs.
Let me explain to you why young people see this very differently than older people who
Don't point at me.
Than older people. They see it very differently because, we lived in that environment. We remember what it was like to have, people selling drugs on the street or there being violence in the community. A lot of these young people, you have to remember, they exist in the wake. So their families were impacted the most by those policies. They grew up in whole communities sucked dry of young men. And then they hear people turning to them and saying, you have, 70+% of young black kids born to single parents. And they say, but you locked up all the fathers, right? Or they say, well, why don't they just marry? And you look at the crime, what parts of the crime bill that actually prevented anyone who had ever been arrested on a drug offense from ever receiving financial aid. And what that did, because crime arrests are so skewed, was basically froze out many of these young African American men from ever changing their life around from a mistake that a lot of young kids make. And so they could never make good on it. And so if you are 22, 24, 26 years old, you maybe listen to your parents who say, oh, it was really bad in the 90s and people made rash decisions, but you're saying, I was born in 1994, 95, whatever, and all I see is the results of the tremendous mistake that you guys made.
So you think that they're holding that against Hillary
I
Clinton?
don't think it's necessarily holding it. I think it's a legitimate gripe. I think that any of us in this room and outside of it who look back on that period, and if you believe that what people, the bills that they passed, particularly the crime bill, if you supported it, if somebody voted for it, if you can look back in retrospect and say, I still believe that that was the best tact, you are lying to yourself. Bill Clinton apologized for that crime bill before the NAACP. He knows, and he said that it created many problems that did not already exist.
Let me get Donna to comment on this.
Look, I think the president did the right thing, and I think throughout the course of the campaign, Secretary Clinton made clear her intentions not to go back and to institute the kind of policies that led to mass incarceration and a lot of pain within the African American community. Charles told me I brought the platform. Read our platform. This is a platform that addressed these issues because we often come under withering criticism, sometimes is justified. I say that as a Democrat, that we often take the base of our party for granted. And because of that, I think this election season, we took the extraordinary step to start talking about issues like crime, like trade, talk about income inequality, talk about our cities, because the party believes that we have to address these concerns. This is part of the pain that Leah was referring to. On the white working class side, it's a betrayal. These trade policies, some of the economic policies left them feeling like there's no there there. The disruption in their lives, the globalization, the recession, the two wars, it has really made them less comfortable and believe that they need a stronger form of leadership, not the kind of leaders that they have promoted and supported, but they need a stronger leadership, which is, I think, the reason why we've seen the rise of Donald Trump within the Republican Party.
But do you think, do you think that the young people whom Charles Blow was referring to, who probably supported Bernie Sanders. Am I right about that?
I think most.
Now, what are they going to do now? Are they going to stay home because they don't like the history of the crime bill and the impact on their communities? And what are you all doing about it?
Oh, look, this is the greatest challenge that we face as a Democratic Party. Donald Trump, if you ask three-fourths of millennials believe Donald Trump is a racist bigot. Now, that's not coming from Democrats, that's coming from, these are millennials. I know a lot of them, too, by the way. In 2008, 18% of all American voters were millennials. In this election season, 30.5% of all voters will be millennials.
And that's ages about, we did them last year, millennials, they rock, but
I
rule?
like to call them under 30.
Under 30.
I mean, you know, you're pushing it when you're, you know, a certain age, but under 30. Let's give them their due. Now, us baby boomers, I'm on that tail end of the baby boomer, but I'm a boomer now. We're at 31% of the election. And yet, so these millennials, Secretary Clinton has to really talk to them. And she has to talk to them, and this is not something you can poll test. They want to feel that you're authentic, that you're going to fight for them, that you're passionate about. And the word is passionate. They want to know that you really believe what you have put your signature behind. They are very, very crucial to this election, and not just for the presidency, but also down the ballot. The reason why Bernie caught that wave is because Bernie addressed these issues head on. Income inequality, student debt, the fact that many students leave college with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of debt. He addressed it. Elizabeth Warren has addressed it and saying that the system is rigged. So they want to, if they don't believe Donald Trump will fight for them, but Hillary has a chance of speaking to their issues and their needs, and if she can reach them, that is an invaluable source of votes that she will need in order to win.
But let me just press you on that before we move to Armstrong, who looks like he's ready to jump in there. You talk about passion, but Hillary Clinton herself has called herself a nerd. I mean, you know, she says, I got control of the issues, and that's what's important. So how is a nerd, self-described nerd, going to get the passion needed to address the people you were just talking about?
Because I think at the end of the day, if they hear, and you know, we have 3 debates coming up, and I think she's an excellent debater. I don't know what Donald Trump is going to do with his hair when it flips over after she said wig. But she's an excellent debater, and I think there will be a moment at that debate when she's going to have to put the pause button in his face, and he's going to look up, and the lights will finally go off. But I think that Hillary has to address not just these issues that they care about. They're very passionate about income inequality. They're passionate about the rigged system. But they want to know, here's the gap. They want to believe that she will fight for them.
Armstrong, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say something about, despite the fact they think that he's a racist, they're still open to him, despite all his problems.
Who? They're open to
Well,
him?
you're making a point about the millennials.
Millennials are not open to him. No,
But-
not in ways that baby boomers, white, blue collar, non-urban, older whites are open to his arguments.
Right.
Not millennials.
Okay, so
Not millennial.
Okay, so here's the point I would like to make. It's a bold one. See, Mrs. Clinton is not doing well because of her policies and because she's a better candidate. She's doing better because Donald Trump comes off as being childish, has no temperament, shows no leadership at times, and he's petty. If Donald Trump were just to be normal, that's all he had to do, was just to appear normal, this would be a different race. It's just a fact. And if I were advising someone like a Donald Trump, I would say to him, because there's a back and forth about these 3 debates, what he should say to Mrs. Clinton, okay, I will compromise and agree with you, but let's take one of the debates to a historical black college for a town hall meeting with a completely black audience, and let us take their issues head on about how we're going to make their community and their problems better. That's what he should do. And I'm willing to bet you. Let's
Hold on,
continue
everybody,
the tradition
please.
of, come on
Please.
now, come on. I'm willing to bet you he show her up.
Okay, wait a
If you were
minute.
to do that. Yes.
Okay.
I would be willing for him to take that risk.
All right, Charles is shaking his head. Why are you shaking? Ladies and gentlemen and young people, millennials and whatever else we have out there, I appreciate your reaction. We're on television.
We are.
We have a time factor. We don't have cameras that are aimed at you so they can hear you reacting, but they can't see you. So I'm going to ask you just to keep it down just a little bit while Charles responds.
No,
'cause he's
I'm
ready.
I think it's a fantastic idea, but I went to a historically black college, and that's not gonna work. I mean,
Why wouldn't it work,
listen, I literally believe that he has been so incendiary. The images of young black protesters being both verbally and physically assaulted at those rallies is burned into people's minds. I think the things that he has said and done about Hispanics, about Muslims, about everybody who was not white is burned into people's minds. I think that there's not a simple cynicism that he's at 1%. There is an open hostility to this man.
So you say he should not go?
I'm just saying.
Everybody.
I don't know how you would keep that audience quiet enough for them to
Everybody
debate.
is saying that Donald Trump is ignoring black people. He's not stopping in black neighborhoods. He's not speaking to black people.
What you don't
now,
want-
now Armstrong is saying he should go to these places
Test the
and
waters
talk to
other
these
than
people.
on a
Are you
national
saying
debate.
don't go?
Presidential debate.
You don't want to test it. You don't want to test the water like that. You setting yourself up. I'm telling you, I just do not believe. I believe that there is legitimate hostility to him. I think that people feel that he is an affront to everything that is right and good about America. I think that
But, however, despite what you think about him and how sad he can be at times, and I agree with that, he is still the stand-up bearer of our party. And it will give those students, it will give those students an opportunity to have a real debate about the issues that they care about. Because listen, you may think this is crazy. It is not a foregone conclusion that Mrs. Clinton has been coronated. There are still weeks left before this race is over. And anything can happen. And Donald Trump has shown that he can rise again. And I think he has one last fight left in him.
Leah Wright-Rigueur, can I get you to comment on this very interesting set of issues?
So, it taps into this whole idea. Donald Trump, I think we all saw, or at least we all heard about, that he is trying to do black outreach. The RNC has hired 4 people, three of them new. But, we're literally talking about a man who is approaching 100% unfavorability ratings amongst black audiences, and who simply does not understand, nor does he care to understand, black people. So, I will give Armstrong some room. And what I will say is that, yes, he should do outreach, but that outreach actually has to be genuine, and there also has to be some kind of realistic policy, right, behind that outreach. So one of the things that the Republican Party consistently dogs the Democratic Party on, and we can argue about that, whatever. But one of the things that they dog is they say, well, you guys are all rhetoric, you're all symbolism. But the fact remains that the Democratic Party always comes to the table with policies. They may not be the greatest policies, they may not be the most effective policies. That really depends on where your ideological slant is, whether you be liberal or whether you be, what do you want to call it, like alt-right. But but they have something. And this has been actually a consistent criticism of black people within the Republican Party. You know, Ed Brooks said in 1966, he devoted an entire book to this, where he said, I may not agree with what Lyndon Johnson is doing, but at least he comes to the table with ideas. We simply can't be the party of no, especially when it comes to civil rights. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to take civil rights off the table by offering something with civil rights. Talking in front of an all-white audience in Wisconsin about law and order is just not going to cut it. And I think one of the things is that this is not just about, say, the Republican Party and its standard bearer, Donald Trump, although he is the figurehead right now. This is a trickle-down effect, so at every single level of the party. And what Republicans have found, when they come in and they speak to black audiences and they speak to audiences in that kind of lecturing or preaching and talking about, say, the Democratic plantation, that simply does not fly.
Now,
right?
Leah,
so it's never going to work.
You mentioned preaching. Donald Trump's advisors and his people have gone to a black church, and they have the support, I saw it on television, of some black religious people. How do you explain that?
The Republican Party has always had the support of black religious leaders, right? So Richard Nixon gets the support of the National Black Baptist Convention, which has 5 million black members. Doesn't mean black people are going to vote for Richard Nixon, right? So this has actually been the kind of bread and butter of Republicans for the past, 50 some odd years. We're going to talk in abstracts about jobs, and we're going to talk about religion. But what we've seen is that that does not work, right? So it doesn't work consistently. So what you need to do is actually look at Republicans who on a state and local level are actually winning over black voters. What are they doing differently? How are they, what are the conversations that they're having? And one of the number one issues that we see, or one of the kind of consistent threads that we see amongst those people, is that when they go into black spaces, and you do have to go into black spaces, right, is that they're actually listening to black people, right? And listening to what black people want, what they need, right? What their concerns are and what their issues are. If we bring it back around to, say, black millennials' number one issue is racism. Their number one issue is racism. So any candidate that wants to win over black millennials, any candidate is going to have to emphasize, right? How are you going to address racism and inequality that is built into multiple systems in our society?
Well, let me ask Armstrong, because, again, I watched those black people in the church seem to be very dedicated to supporting Donald Trump, and a couple of them look pretty young to me. How would you explain that?
Pastor Mark Burns and others. Listen, people have relationships. Donald Trump used to talk about how all these entertainers and celebrities that he once knew were going to endorse him. I mean, he was this apprentice. I mean, this is not the Donald Trump that we knew years ago. He had relationships, and he has Omarosa, but they're hand-tied. Yeah, he does, but look, listen, wait a minute, you're taking it the wrong way. I have tremendous respect for Omarosa. Yes, I do. The point I'm making is that you can have all the Omarosas, all the Pastor Burns, all the Ben Carsons in the world, but if you continue to say crazy things, you give them nothing to work with. So it's not Omarosa, it's not the pastor, again, it's Donald Trump. That is the problem. So you cannot blame them or malign them or call them names, because we need to be a power base in both parties. So whomever is elected, you've got somebody who has that person's ear. You should never demonize people for being in a place where they can advance your cause. That is crazy. That's what freedom is about. Me personally, I want badly to vote for Donald Trump. Badly.
You want that to go out on the air?
It's the truth. But you know what? Even for me, he makes it so difficult. But I keep hoping and hoping and hoping that he changes.
Okay. Donna is eager to.
So I just want to. Oh, all right. Thank you. I have to bring the mic close again. I love this conversation about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has received close to $5 billion in what we call free or earned media. We have spent the entire 2 years having a political discussion about Donald Trump, and in the last few weeks, will he pivot, will he not pivot? Ladies and gentlemen, God bless Donald Trump, but 82 days from now, I hope we can finally say, goodbye, you're fired. Now, however, it doesn't mean that some of the issues will not go away, some of the pain and anxiety that we see. And Charles, yes, Donald Trump has insulted just about the entire country. Women, minorities, white people, disabled, he is an equal opportunity insulter. So, but I want to make another point, because while I have such a captive audience, I'm 56 years old, so I've been involved in the Democratic Party for 40 years. And I love my party. It's been my home and it's been my family, and it has motivated me to give back and pay it forward. That's why I accepted this interim position. But 16 years from now, another presidential year. Today we're looking at a country where 32 states are majority white. In 2032, we're going to be looking at 34 states that are majority minority. So while we're sitting here having this great conversation about the 2016 election, which is very important, what are we doing to recruit 10,000 new people who will lead us in the future, be they Republican or Democratic? What are we doing to make sure that when we finally reach this stage in our beloved home state of Louisiana and other places across the country, when we're the majority are not just voters, what are we going to do in terms of our public policy, our political leadership? So I think every political cycle, we should use it as a stepping board to build the next generation of political leaders. Sitting in this room somewhere, I don't have my glasses on, is one of the most important women that have mentored me in my youth and also in my old age. Not as young as my sister here at the end, but I told my age. But Eleanor Holmes Norton. Eleanor Holmes Norton, where's Eleanor? All right. Oh, damn. I mentioned Eleanor because Eleanor was the lawyer for Fannie Lou Hamer. Eleanor fought to get Fannie Lou Hamer a seat at the Democratic Convention in 1964. And Eleanor has lived long enough to make sure that in 2016, not only did Fannie Lou have a seat, well, Fannie Lou ran the convention, Leah Daughtry. Fannie Lou called the roll, Stephanie Rollins Blake. And yes, Fannie Lou is now the interim chair of that party. That's what change is all about. Change is not just focusing on a racist, bigoted candidate who's going to build new barriers, but change is focusing on making sure that we keep the doors that we have opened. That's why I'm about making sure President Obama's legacy is not just putting Hillary Clinton in the White House, but changing these state houses across the country so that the doors that we have opened, the seats that we have filled will continue to be occupied by people who want to make change and progress. Excuse me. Hell with Donald Trump.
Okay, thank you. Now, Donna, you've mentioned two things I wanted to bring up. You mentioned media, and you mentioned President Obama. Let me go first to President Obama, and then I'll come back to media. Because earlier this year, President Jimmy Carter said that the election of Mr. Obama was a hopeful sign. But he added, I think there's a heavy reaction among some of the racially conscious Republicans against an African American being president. Now, every one of you, or most of you, have talked about anger. How much of the racism that we're hearing in the country doesn't have anything to do with Donald Trump, has to do or had its origin in the fact that President Obama was the first black president and was black. Charles? Wake up, Charles.
Well, I mean, first I want to say this, which I think relates to this question, which I completely disagree with this idea that you cannot blame the people who support Donald Trump for his bigotry. There is no difference between the acceptance of bigotry and the support of it. There is no safe space. There is no place for you to hold yourself separate and apart from it and clean and washed of it. If you accept that he is a bigot and you still say that I will vote for him, then you too are exercising a form of bigotry.
Okay, wait a minute. Then before we get to the rest of my question, let me get Armstrong to respond, because you just got sort of attacked, I think.
Oh, that wasn't about you, Armstrong, was it?
No. I'm not sensitive, by the way. This is fair game. Listen, this country and many people are just not single-issue candidates and people who vote. There are so many issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's the refugee crisis, whether how do we return jobs in the economy to certain people that have been left out. And for business owners, when Mrs. Clinton talked about raising taxes on the wealth class, and when Bernie Sanders talked about a free college education, and we know the impact that it would have on communities, especially black kids. A lot of them will take the cheaper route and go to these community colleges, and they won't get the best education from a four-year education. That's my opinion. So look, while we care about racism, and I despise it, I don't care where it's coming from, because people can be racist, black people can be just as racist as anybody else. It has nothing to do with the hue of your skin. Oh, but they can. That's your no, not mine. I respect your no, but it's not mine. Not from my perspective, not in my house. I've seen all sides of it, okay? And it's ugly. None of us should use the N-word. I don't care who we are. We cannot say it's an affectionate word, but I won't get there. That's not what this conversation is about. But my point is, because we're not single-issue candidates, we should care about race. We should fight bigotry at every turn. But race is not the only thing that people are voting about in this election and elections in the future.
Well, do you think that a lot of this anger, though, goes back to the election about race, goes back to the election of Barack Obama?
Listen, I think Donna, I'm not going to bring Donna in this because she may disagree with me. I think in politics, every party wants to defeat the opposition in 4 years and 2 years. It's just politics. I think there are things about President Obama and his policies that the Republican Party and leaders in the Republican Party just don't support with any other president. You saw this no matter what the color of the president is. I think it's a different bar for President Obama because it's easy to use race as the reason. Listen, I voted for President Obama the first time. I have a lot of respect for President Obama. I think even with President Obama's Affordable Care, I think there have been some very good things about his Affordable Care, the things that the Republican Party should have embraced. I think people who were trying to malign him with the birther issues were ridiculous. Many of us
that was Donald Trump, among others.
Yeah, and that's where it all started. And once you start attacking the president, you're just going to lose black people. There's just no way around it. If you did
but Armstrong, would someone have said to a white president on the floor of the Congress, "You lie"? I mean, is that not racial?
I know Congressman Wilson. He's from South Carolina. I do know him. And was Congressman Wilson being racist? No. Okay? No, he was not. It's just, listen.
But you didn't answer my question. My question was,
no.
would he have said that to a white president?
Yes. I mean, look at what politics have happened over the centuries. I mean, we're more tame today than we've ever been. This is just how politics work.
Leah, let me just ask you to weigh in. Hang on.
Absolutely not.
Leah, how much of this anger that all of you have talked about relates actually to the election of our first black president?
Right, so I can pull out some numbers here, and I think it's important to think about, Pew actually just did a study, and one of the things that they found is that racism actually does motivate a considerable amount of the anger, right, that we've seen over the last 8 years. But I do think it's important to connect it to this idea of change, of feeling left out, of feeling like anything related to race is a zero-sum game. So you asked earlier this idea about, about backlash. And one of the things that we know is that whenever we see moments of progress, right, moments of intense progress, you know almost immediately that you're going to be faced with backlash, and you're going to be faced with a vicious, right, very, very vicious backlash, right? Because there's an idea, I think there's an idea, and people of color, I think, operate under the idea that there should be room for all of us, right? And there should be equality for all of us, whereas a lot of the country is feeling like if you get something, and if you get equality, that means I'm losing something as well, right? And it's wrapped up in class, and it's wrapped up in race, but it is really wrapped up in race. So I don't think we should be surprised that we saw an intensity, not just in kind of, you know, attacks on hyperbole on Obama, but also physical, right? An uptick in the number of physical threats to Obama's safety in the aftermath of his election. These are things that we can't discount.
Charles, let me come back again to another thing that Donna raised, which was media. What is your perspective on the role that media played in elevating Donald Trump to where he is now?
They played.
And why is that?
Money, right? So.
Well, did the media go ahead.
Yes, here it is, right? So they played footsie with him because he would come on whenever they called, and whenever he'd come on every day, he'd call in every day, and he would say outrageous things, and they thought it was cute and funny, and they could also get good ratings out of it. And so they did that. And as he rose in the polls, then they continued to do that. And what they were giving away in terms of what is called earned media, they were reaping in terms of ratings. So the media built Donald Trump. And he knew how to play the game much better than they did. Meaning, Donald Trump has lived in New York City his entire life, which is the media capital of the country. He has been working the media since at least the early 70s. He is probably twice as old as any anchor he will meet on television, right? Literally, I'm just telling the truth. And what he understands much better than they do is how to control an interview, meaning he would call in. The reason you don't want that to happen is because you want the person in studio so you know they're not getting help. If you call in, you could have your whole team around you Googling furiously to answer questions. He would have the anchors come across town, only 6 blocks to Trump Tower to interview him, rather than doing it in studio, because he knew at that point they couldn't have help.
So Donna, did the Democrats miss out when this was happening? I mean, why weren't they dealing with this? Did they misunderstand what was happening?
Well, we had 5 candidates, 3 who clearly got an Uber before the contest started and didn't really compete. Bernie Sanders would go out there and have the largest crowds that I've ever seen in politics, crowds larger than Donald Trump, and yet if Donald Trump came on at 11 o'clock or 11:02, we covered him until 11:22. Bernie is still speaking. And we never pick up the fact that Bernie is drawing crowds and also speaking to the American people. Donald Trump increased ratings, profits, and he gave us sound bites that we reacted to every day. I haven't gone back and looked at my CNN appearances in 2016 versus 2012 or 2008, but I guarantee you I was on CNN a lot longer and more times because of Donald Trump. And that's because he's a news story. In a year where the establishment was under attack, he was able to essentially dispatch all of these big candidates like Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush raised $115 million and Donald Trump just squashed him. Scott Walker had $70 million and quit the race before the primaries even got underway. But I want to go back to this issue of racism because I have a hard time labeling any group of Americans, any citizens, or using this label racism because you got to get you got to be very careful about this. There's a lot of pain and anxiety. I've seen these polls. I've been in these cities. I've been in these places. People, Skip, when I go to your beloved West Virginia, or when I go home to my beautiful, great state of Louisiana, when it's dry, people are just worried about their lives, their livelihood. And I think when they saw President Obama, when his approval ratings shot up to 70%, they're like, help us, give us a chance. And I think for many of them, they look back and they're so disgusted with Washington, D.C., they're so disgusted with the policies, they don't believe people are listening to them. And I think part of this is just that anxiety, the economic anxiety and the frustration there. A lot of it, but on the Trump side of the equation, there's also a lot of scapegoating that, you know, you're facing with these problems because the Mexicans are taking your job, the immigrants are coming, the blacks got all your money, you're paying your taxes, they're not doing their fair share, we're giving all of them. So there's a lot in this so-called mix. We call it gumbo. And I think we have to be careful how we describe it because some of those voters want to come home. They listen to Bernie. They love what Bernie was saying. On the other hand, they're also listening to Trump. And Trump is trying to be their voice. Now, I don't know if he's going to succeed, but I think that's what's driving some of this disruption.
You don't have to be that careful. In this,
I'm careful.
I'm going to put this way.
Go ahead.
We cannot think of racism as always having to be conscious or constant, right? That you don't have. It doesn't have to be an active participation. You don't have to actively believe that you are being racist to be racist, right? That it can be subconscious. So I don't have to know what you're calling, what you're feeling in your heart. All I have to do is analyze your actions. And if your actions tell me something, that's all I need to know about what, and I don't need to describe, put a label on you. I need to put a label on what your actions are demonstrating to me.
Okay.
And how they're impacting me and my life and the people who look like me. I don't have to be that careful.
Armstrong?
You know, you're right, by the way. I agree with what you just said. I want to come back to the media. Yes, you can say the media set Donald Trump up, and Mrs. Clinton didn't have to do much, and they knew exactly when the primary was over and he was the nominee. Then they were going to let out the floodgate of everything about him and put him under a harsh microscope and unleash Armageddon on him, which is what they're doing now. But we have to remember that from the day one of Donald Trump as an outsider, he always led in the polls. And when you're the top dog, Donald, you understand this. When you lead in the polls, you're going to get the media coverage. It was only when my main man, Dr. Carson, my man, challenged him. He was the only one, the brother. Okay, and he is a brother. When he challenged him, then and only then did Trump call him what, a pedophile and everything but a child of God. You remember that. In his religion, went after him, talked about hammering his mother. So, Trump earned, whether you like it or not, the media coverage, wall to wall. He was the front dog from the beginning. He annihilated them all throughout the primary. And there was never, and what the media kept saying, to their credit, Bush will rise, Cruz will rise, Rubio would rise. And Trump continued his scorched earth tactics and destroyed them all. So to the media's credit, as someone in the media, and I believe in that institution, Trump earned all the media coverage because he was an outsider. No one in this room thought Donald Trump would ever be the nominee. It was a joke. It was. But because he became the nominee, that will be the story of this presidential election season.
Charles is going to answer that quickly, and then those of you who have questions, if you'll take each side of the aisle, we have microphones. I'm going to ask, don't just talk to each other. I want you to talk to the audience.
I'm just trying to talk to my brother here.
While Charles is answering this question, anyone who and we do have mics, do we not? And I would actually urge you to think about your question so that it can be a question rather than a campaign statement, and make it brief so that we can get in a lot of voices between now and 7 o'clock. Charles, if you can remember what you were going to say, go.
No, I'm just saying that's a fallacy that he earned that coverage. I mean, people made money. People made money. Yes, there's no way that we should have been listening to full speeches of Donald Trump when he was basically just reciting his poll numbers. There is no way that was news. There's no, Donald Trump, there's no accident that he was tweeting at 5 o'clock in the morning because you knew that was how you run the morning shows. You say something extraordinary at 5 o'clock in the morning, that's just in time to take over a morning show and not enough time for anybody to respond to it. He knew what he was doing, and they knew what he was doing. And so I reject it. No, I'm not blaming him, but I am calling him. Listen, I don't knock your hustle, but I'm just calling your hustle a hustle.
Right? Yeah, no question. I got
It's a hustle.
It's a hustle.
Okay,
No question about that.
we're going to now take a few questions from the audience. And please identify yourself as you, before you ask your
That's
question.
Brother Flash Wiley.
I mean, this one may not have to identify himself. Do we have a mic person here who's making?
Touch.
That's
I know you want to leave. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Gorm. I have actually a very serious question. And the question is this. This is a very temporal panel, and it's focusing on this election and talking about all the issues that go into describing what is going on and what's happening. But if you think about it and step back a little bit, this is a 150-year-old plus story. It is the story of taking the white man after the Civil War and taking from him all or a lot of the privileges that he used to have before the Civil War. The French call it a glissade, going downhill and sometimes rapidly. When they gave the vote to the women in 1920, that was part of the glissade. Barack Obama becoming president of the United States was part of the glissade. What is happening is the reason that a lot of people are angry in this country is because they used to have power and substance in this country just because they were who they were. And they are having a hard time coming to terms with the melting pot that Donna has described and others have described happening and what to do about it. And so the question is, when these people are losing power, what will they do? You know, will they be pushed to the situation of violence? Are they going to accept this nicely? Is there someone worried about helping them get over this situation?
Thank you. Armstrong, who wants to answer
You
that?
want to go, Armstrong?
And let's remember now, we're asking questions, okay?
Well, I think this idea, you know, every time I hear on the news that the big problem with white working class voters is they felt that like they've been ignored, I say, give me a break. If you're basically saying to all of the people who have always been ignored in America, that now because you feel like you no longer have the guarantee that none of us have ever enjoyed, and you are upset about that, then welcome to the club. Right? Right. But that is the crux of it. There is a social contract that privilege granted that said that you would get ahead even if other people did not. And you enjoyed and luxuriated in that privilege. And now you are beginning to feel the same anxieties that the other people who are not white in this country have felt since it began. And you want us to feel sorry for that. I'm sorry, I have other things to do.
Did you have Armstrong, did you have a quick response? Did you want to respond?
Listen, most people have had to adjust to a new America and new circumstances. And I mean, everybody is being impacted by what's going on in this country. And for someone, you know, I saw Professor Gates' movie last night, Still I Ride. And I'm not giving him a plug here, but it was an excellent movie to talk about this issue, this very issue of how when people feel that their way of life has changed, their privileges have changed, it doesn't matter what your race is, they need someone to blame. Instead of looking at their own circumstances and adjusting to, we have to adjust to changing economies and circumstances every day. That's who we are. Everybody adjusts to that. The base on race is so petty, it's just almost ridiculous. You got to get over yourself and find a new economy.
All right.
It is the truth, the loss of manufacturing jobs, rapid technological growth. People feel disoriented. Look at the Brexit. Look at the Brexit. I read Glenn's excellent column in the Washington Post. Donald Trump tweeted about it. He's trying to take credit now for Glenn Hutchins' work. But the Brexit vote in Great Britain, I mean, you saw the schism there. Migration, the social transformation. Again, just take a look at these changes. Yes, it could be a little bit of, I can see some similarities in terms of the post-Reconstruction era in our own country, but we're going through a period of adjustment in our country, and that's why you see so much anxiety, I think, in the electorate.
But we're all feeling that anxiety.
And it's not just, of course we are, Charles, and when you see—
But we're not turning to a bigot, right? So that's the difference.
And the suicide rates of blacks is not as high as whites. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to tell, there's something going on. I'm concerned because I'm concerned about the country and the country's future. I mean, when you look at the pessimism among white voters, yeah, this is huge. Black voters who make less money and they're more displaced are not as pessimistic as white voters. So, and the rise of opioid use and so much more. I'm just saying something is happening in our society and we should be worried about it across the board rather than labeling people as racist or bigots. There's something else, and Donald Trump is just playing the tune of the dog whistler. He's using a bullhorn, but there's something really else at play. That's all I'm saying, Charles.
Okay, we have a question on this side.
Yes, hi, my name is Janine Smith, and I just wanted to posit to Armstrong Williams that your party is for taking away voter registration rights, as well as taking away affirmative action, so it's tough for an African American to advocate
I hope they do take
those
away,
voter registration
adjust
rate
affirmative action.
issues. In any case, my question relates back to Martin Luther King, which is that there was a legal basis for a lot of what went on back then, whether it was desegregation or equal rights, and then when you move forward to affirmative action and including desegregation again of the schools, my question is, what would be in the Black Lives Matter and in Hillary's campaign as well, what would be the legal basis that would help move forward this discussion on race? What issues could we then go forward and say this would help our discussion on race, but from a legal basis, which is where Martin Luther King did a lot of his great work?
Well, listen, I actually see, and like many of my colleagues, a lot of social redeeming value and aspects of Black Lives Matters. Because Black Lives Matters has an angst with both parties. Black Lives Matters wants to hold both parties accountable, and especially the Democratic Party, where the majority of their votes go, and exactly what are you going to do to impact and change our communities. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, you see this device here, this Apple phone. The number one demographic in this country that consumes this Apple phone is the African American community. Absolutely, more than any other community. That is a reason to go to Apple and say you should go in those communities because of the technology and everything else, and you should do more in those communities, especially in these school systems. They can never do enough. The other thing is that the issue here is about money. How do you return those role models back to those communities that have left instead of the people they have to look up to now in terms of what they're modeling their lives after? You've got to go back and create some kind of enterprise zone, entrepreneurship, because you don't teach financial literacy in school. A lot of these kids don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know anything about money. They don't know anything about finances. We talk about finances as a dirty word. For me and growing up in our household, my parents always taught us, no matter how bad the school system was, you get the best grade out of that school that you possibly can, because that education is your passport to the future. And also, college doesn't work for everyone. Sometimes we got to get back to those technical schools, those vocational learnings that is missing in these communities now, because no kid learned the same. A parent can raise 5 or 6 children, but many of those children are entirely different. Some may need to be disciplined, some may be spoken to in a different way, and then we've got to encourage, like someone mentioned, these people coming out of the penal system should not be punished to the fact where they can't go back after they paid their dues to society and find a job, because a lot of these young kids come out of this prison system and they're punished for the rest of their life. You know, I was reading this story.
Armstrong,
I'm sorry.
let's
I answered your question. That's all that matters. Thank you for asking.
finally. Yes, over here. And please identify yourself.
My name is Lawrence Miller, and I don't want to pick on you, Armstrong, but I don't believe that you answered Charles Blow's question.
Okay.
Which had to do, because you did mention Paul Ryan about HBCUs. Yes. You very proudly talked about that. But when he mentioned about people who are bigots and people who support bigots are no different, you didn't pick up on that question. Because Paul Ryan said that what Donald Trump said was textbook racism, bigotry, right? Yet, I'm going to vote for him.
So your question is?
So my question is to you, in terms of answering his question, what is it about your party that will make excuses for a candidate who speaks bigotry, yet supports that particular individual?
Okay. And let's have some brief answers now, because we've
I appreciate the spirit of your question, and I did denounce bigotry, but I think my answer is that we're not single-issue people. There are a lot of issues that we consider when voting for a candidate. But listen, there is no question that Donald Trump, whether it's about the Muslims, whether it's about immigration, whatever, I mean, the things that he says is just, it certainly does not, it puts the establishment Republican Party in an awkward situation where we have to denounce it. And there's no question that
I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Paul Ryan. Why would Paul Ryan support somebody who he knows said something bigger?
If I were Paul Ryan and I were the Speaker of the House, I would endorse him, because that's what the party's about. It transcends all this. That's what we do. That's what the Democratic Party would do. They would support their nominee.
So basically what you're saying is that I would trade in
power
we tried for racism.
Donald Trump is talked to by these party leaders. He's talked to. They are telling him it's unacceptable, but at the end of the day, he's the party nominee, and they're going to stand with the nominee.
Okay,
that's just the bottom line.
All right, fine. I hope we have some questions about Hillary Clinton. Young lady.
Hi, my name is Sydney Lampkin, and I'm a 17-year-old student at the University of Pennsylvania. I had a quick question. Now that, since the Southern Strategy, people have been accusing the Republican Party of harboring racist feelings for years. And now that the fact that the majority of the party has confirmed so many of those, ideas and beliefs that people already have about the Republican Party, do you think that this will prompt a time for self-reflection amongst the non-bigoted Republicans in the House and the Senate? Because so much of their base has confirmed what so many people have already believed.
Thank you. Leah? Let's have Leah speak to that.
So this is in part what my book is about, and it's absolutely gonna prompt soul searching. Chances are the party won't do anything about it. It has, after every single major loss over the last 52 years, the Republican Party has had a period of soul searching. They have talked about race. They have made attempts to do outreach. They have done all of this stuff, and they always pivot back, right, to what I would call the easy solution, right? The problem with that, though, and this is what the 2012 autopsy report, 2013 autopsy report said, is that demographics in this country are changing. So as you keep pivoting back to your base, which is largely white men right now, eventually that's not going to work. And so the party is, one of the things that I've said is that the party is in a racial crisis, or it's in a racial crossroads. It's actually now beyond that. Right? It has to actually hit rock bottom in order for something to change. And if it didn't happen in 1964, and if it's not happening in 2016, then when is it actually going to happen? It's not.
I want to add to this quickly, Charlene.
Thank you.
The Republican establishment, Paul Ryan included, have given Donald Trump until September 5th to change his rhetoric, to change many of his positions. Look, if you don't like the answer, just keep it to yourself, please. Thank you. Let me just finish. My God. I'm up here by myself, please. Fighting. And then I got to fight against you. Please give me a break. Now, back to you and your question. Okay, thank you very much. But it's the truth. Oh, so they have given him to September 5th because of the very things that you're talking about. And also, and particularly for the down ticket, you've got to separate Donald Trump from the Republican Party. You may not, he is not representative of the Republican Party. And it's a fact. He's just not. There you go again. There you go. I got hit all today.
Okay.
It's okay. It's
All
okay.
right.
Yeah. So you've got to separate him, okay, from the Republican Party.
And by the way, people,
I think you can separate him from the Republican
that
establishment, but not the
Donna,
Republican
I
Party.
think that Armstrong has made a very important point.
Yeah.
He's here to have you listen to what he has to say. And if you have a disagreement, please come to the microphone. Please. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I am a millennial myself, and I also work in the media. And I am curious how we could help actually get the message out, because like you said, really the only reason Trump is really shining right now is because of the media. So how else, Donna, could we change that to actually shine light on what's really important?
You know, I think campaigns is about energy, excitement. Campaigns are about energy, excitement, purpose, and of course, and it's driven by the voters. Voters matter. And I think in every community across this country, don't wait and watch cable news and decide if that is the medium by which you are going to get your information. We have the ability to have targeted messages every place across this country. So we need to start controlling the airways where we live, where we work, where we play, and where we pray. That's number one. Number two, we need to start reacting and responding and also being proactive about what we are hearing from political leaders, whether they are running for city council, sheriff, that matters. You see what's happened in Milwaukee, or President of the United States. So I think we have to be more actively engaged in the political process, not when candidates call upon us to vote, but when we believe it's in our own best interest to put our values out there and to be engaged at our local communities. It's all about what I like to perceive as grassroots organizing. You know, I tell the president all the time, there's a difference between a community organizer and a grassroots organizer. A grassroots organizer never stops. Community organizer go from campaign to campaign, making sure that you can get these issues moved. But a grassroots organizer never stop organizing, never stop engaging, and never stop having a conversation. Donald Trump is sucking up a vacuum that exists. And with his big, overt side personality, he makes news every day with a tweet. But I think you can do it with 140 characters right where you live, and you can be very effective in changing the dynamics if you get engaged.
Donna, that brings up a question in my mind. What, if anything, have the Democrats learned from Donald Trump?
We haven't.
Don't hit me now.
Oh, come on, I'm not even close to being somebody that strike unless the iron is hot. This has been a very incredible year. To see someone, first of all, this whole antagonism between the establishment party and the grassroots. The Democratic Party is suffering from the same thing that the Republican Party is suffering from. It's just that we're not having a breakdown in the public. But internally, we have to be a party that really represents the grassroots. I mean, Bernie Sanders was a wake-up call. I listened to what he said. I believe what he said, that we have to recruit new voters, that we have to go out there and reach people where they live, where they work, and where they play and they pray. So I think that wake-up call, I don't know if anybody else heard the call. I heard the call, and I know over the next 82 days, I'm going to make sure that we have a party that is focused not just on the top of the ticket, which is great. I mean, I love winning presidential elections, but if you're not winning at the state and local level, I mean, the Voting Rights Act, this is the first year since 1965 we don't have the Voting Rights Act. 36 states, as a result of the election in 2008, 36 states changed their voting laws. I mean, we have to be engaged at the state and local level. We cannot just vote in presidential elections as if this is the Olympics, and then every year there's a World Series and the Republicans vote. So I think that there are lessons that we're learning, and how Donald Trump is able to get his message out, the amplification on social media. Look, when my ex-boss inspired the invention of the internet, we had no idea that these tools will now change and transform the way we communicate. And I think we have to begin to really figure out how social media can be a tool for progressive change. and how to utilize it to raise this new vote that's out there. One last thing, 53 million millennials are now registered to vote. That's up by 20 million from 2012. Again, I keep talking about these millennials because you're the ball game.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Brandy Colander.
Can you stand a little closer to the mic?
I sure
and
can.
tell us who
Is
you
that
are?
better? Brandy Colander, have had the privilege of serving in this administration in 2 different roles, and I want to start with what Charles mentioned earlier, and just the acceptance of bigotry and the systematic impact that that has on future generations. But the question I have for us today, and for you all, given your breadth of experience, is really around the future of the democratic system, and if there are things that we have learned in terms of the 2 things that seem to overhang both parties, whether it's email-gate, if you will, mental health, bigotry on the other side of the table. What is it that we could do differently structurally to our democratic system? Are there checks and balances that we should put in place moving forward so that we are never similarly situated if we do feel like these candidates are unpalatable? For anyone?
One thing that's happening that's really interesting this time around is that I think that the third-party candidates will actually have an impact in a lot of states. You have some of them that are getting, 12% in national polls. If you have a very close state, that makes a real difference. And you have not just one. There are 4 that I can name off the top of my head, and the top one might be getting 12, but someone getting 4, 3, 2. All those things start to add up, and if you get somewhere close to 20% and somebody casting a ballot not for the top 2 candidates, that means something. And I think that a lot of people who are protest voting are doing that on purpose to try to force us to a system where we start to normalize the idea that there are more options than only 2. That's actually, that's democracy at work. Whether you like that or not, it's democracy at work. However, because I got to get back to this, I give no lenience whatsoever to the Republican Party at all. There is 0 separation between Donald Trump and the Republican Party. They had 17 choices and they chose him. He was not forced on anybody. It was one of the most diverse fields that I had seen of any party in an incredibly long time. They had 2 people of Hispanic origin. They had a black man. They had Indian, Bobby Jindal. They had a female. You had all kinds of choices.
But would you,
you chose him.
In terms of just to be a little bit more specific, you have a pending federal investigation, and then you have some of the bigotry experiences that we've seen. You have questions around mental health. Would you structurally include different checks in the system? Is that something that we're ready to have a conversation around? I mean, I guess the question is, how do we not, in addition to the third-party candidates, which I think they're becoming they're formidable players.
Thank you.
I say, well, here's 2 things. These are my hobby horses. I say get rid of caucuses. I think they're thoroughly undemocratic. They punish poor people. They punish anybody who cannot pay for a babysitter to show up and sit somewhere for 3, 4, 5 hours. They punish people who work jobs that will not allow that. They punish people who do not have transportation to those particular places to caucus. They punish all of those people. And the second thing, and Donna won't like this, but get rid of these superdelegates. It's a time over for that.
All right, I'm going to try to get to as many of the remaining questions, but we also want to leave time for our conclusion from Professor Bobo. So if you could make, all right. If we could make our questions brief and our answers, then we can have the last word from Professor Bobo. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Marcelina Morgan. I'm the founding director of the Hip Hop Archive at Harvard University. Much of my life has been about representation, making sure youth, especially youth of color, have a place in every institution that has to do with power in this society. Within hip hop culture, it isn't a question of they are awake. It is, as we would say in hip hop, they woke, okay? And they stay woke. That is, the hip hop generation, which includes the millennials, are so very much aware of what has been going on, what has been going wrong, and that they need to do something. Whether it's online, whether it's with Katrina and coming down and leading a lot of the movement in terms of supporting Katrina, in terms of Ferguson, in terms of all of those aspects of the movement. This is a generation that believes in a dream, they imagine, and will not be torn down. Now, my question is, to what degree is the Democratic Party in particular figuring out how to tap into it? Because the only way that they seem to be talked about is as the problem, okay? The at risk, the this. And the community itself sees itself as really making change, the future, and figuring out how to work with various other political parties.
We tried to capture their voices at the convention. We tried to capture it in the platform. We're going to capture their voices in our literature, but more importantly, we want their voices heard. We want their voice to be part of the great symphony that we're trying to create as we try to get out the vote and remind people the importance of this vote. This is the first election, I believe, in my lifetime where you have all three branches of government at stake. I mean, remember, President Obama did his job in nominating a replacement for Justice Scalia. And yet, I don't know how many days it is, we're going on 150, 157 days. We have not heard from the Senate. They have not called any hearings. So this is a time when the generation should speak loud, should be proud, but they also have an agenda within the Democratic Party that address many of their concerns.
Thank you.
I'll share
Yes,
the
sir.
platform.
Just a real quick question. Much of what we've heard, I think most of the panelists are in agreement that something is going on in the country. We've heard a lot of the negatives. I guess my question is, how much responsibility do you believe the current president bears for that? Because we haven't heard much talk from him, from any of the panelists, except in the most congratulatory terms. And as I think someone mentioned at one point, there's a tragedy unfolding in Louisiana, but he's here. So someone, if anyone can speak to that.
And your name is?
He's
Oh,
here,
I'm sorry,
but he's
Javier
here, but let
David.
me just tell you something.
No,
I'm
Javier
gonna
David is
tell
my
you
name.
the truth. No, I'm gonna tell you this because I've been dealing with this all day. He is here, but FEMA, because I used to call FEMA Federal Employees Missing in Action. They are on the ground, they've been on the ground. He's been in touch with the governor. Valerie has been in touch with the governor, state lawmakers. They have sent enormous federal resources. And I do believe that this president is responding in real time to the real dangers that is happening to the people of Louisiana. And let me say something. I mean, the reason why I brought my little iPad is because I'm making sure that this president, as well as my governor, the governor today was asked this question. He said, should the president come on down here? He said, first of all, he explained what the president is doing, and he said, after we dry out, when we can afford to have the presidential motorcade and all that other stuff, yes, we want him to come down. But right now, he's making sure that the power is being restored. He's putting critical infrastructure, resources, shelters, and most of all, food and some real critical needs for the people who are perishing as we speak. So yes, the White House is deeply involved, and I'm grateful that the president is on top of it. So that's you got it from me.
Thank you, thank you.
However, what
And
you've
let's
asked
make it brief.
is part of the problem, is this. You mentioned the accolades, because their community will not constructively criticize the president and the black community where he's fallen miserably short. They won't, because either you're anti-Obama, you against the president, and there are some things where the president could have done an absolutely better job. The last thing we would expect is that these inner cities would be on fire on his dime. Now, you call it whatever it is. It's on his dime. Had it been a white president, you would see protests all over this place from different kinds of people. But they don't say anything because of the hue of his skin.
Wait.
You get your turn. Hold on. It's it is my opinion.
Armstrong, we got it.
Yeah,
Leah,
okay.
Leah,
Yes, they won't criticize.
Hold on, Armstrong. Leah, very briefly now.
So just very briefly, so I'm going to try and take Donna and Armstrong's comment and to say that I think one of the things that we have seen is the rise of social protests, right, that have come about exactly because, in part, because many of these things are happening under a black president, right? So when you ask millennials, many of them talk about their disenchantment being because they had so much hope, right, for what would happen under a black president. That being said, we do see a kind of criticism that is happening within, at least within one party. One thing to take note is that many of these activists, many of these kind of young black people who are participating in these social protests and who do have important grievances on inequality, actually didn't protest the RNC because they said it would be like moving a boulder, right, up 90 degrees, versus being able to push the Democratic Party and have their voices heard in there, right, even if they are highly critical of that. So I think we do see that, and we are seeing some give and take within some segments, right? The shift, this kind of really big birth of this reform movement in the aftermath of moments like Ferguson is a direct reflection of that.
Thank you. I'm going to do the British thing now because we are running out of time, and I want to give our Professor Bobo an opportunity to sum up. So I'm going to take the next 3 questions over here, and then I'm going to take 2 over here, and I'm going to leave it to the panel to take notes and answer the ones you feel you can answer, or you believe. I hate when people say feel when they really mean believe, but anyway, that's my hash. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm one of the 4 millennials in the room. I think that, thank you so much for everything you've said. It's a real honor here it's an honor being here and listening to it. One of the, as Leah's saying, as a millennial, something that I find unattractive about the elective cycle is the division that's arisen. I think this panel with such esteemed names and someone as amazingly young as Charlene on it, it is reflective of how divisive the discourse has become. And I wonder, as we look towards the future, the election is coming up soon. How do we heal the rift that has arisen, and what comes next? Because pretty soon we won't be talking about Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. We'll be talking about one of them as a candidate and as the next president.
Got it. How to heal the rift and division. Yes, ma'am, you? Coming over there a minute.
Linda Burnham, Oakland, California. I'd like to hear the reflections of the panelists on the impact of the post-Ferguson Black Lives Matter movements on the candidates, the parties, and the political moment. And I'd also like to hear about, there's at least the perception that although the Democratic Party depends on the black vote, and we give it the black vote at over 90%, grassroots activists on the ground have at least the perception that the work of moving the black vote, particularly reluctant voters, is grievously under-resourced. And I'm wondering whether that's going to change over the next 80-plus days. Thank you.
Thank you. Question over here. You all taking notes on these? Okay.
Hi, my name is Karen Mapp. I'm a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'd like to ask the panel to talk about what can we do, what can both parties do, and what can the media do to have us have deeper conversations about race. The sister back here mentioned being woke. I see a lot of very promising conversations that our young people are having about race and racism and white supremacy. So what is it that the parties are going to do and the media is going to do to push forward those kinds of deep conversations?
Well, I'll make a little advertisement for myself at the moment. You may tune in to my Race Matters Solutions on public television. PBS NewsHour, we're looking at not complaints, we're looking at solutions. And you can go to the pbsnewshour.org and just put my name in it, and if you can't get the name, just put in Race Matters. Did I earn my keep here? Thank you. And one more over here, and final one over here.
Hi, I'm from Nacogdoches, Texas, and my question with you today of this panel is that one of the problems that we face, and I guess this is more for Mr. Armstrong, is that gerrymandering is one of the greatest things that affects us as far as voting is concerned in the state of Texas. And one of the reasons
we didn't get that.
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering, okay.
And the reason I asked the question is because for some areas, especially from where I'm from, it's a rural area. And so because there is such a disenfranchised area, those areas are heavily Republican. And the reason they are is because those lines are drawn to keep everyone into certain sectors of their community. And so my question would be, as a Republican, if we're talking about what the president has not done, those areas are being affected because we cannot voice our opinion for him because of the reason that we're in one little area with one representative.
Think we got that one? You got that one? Yes, ma'am. Final question.
Warlen Gator, a former retired HIV prevention researcher from Atlanta. And I'm one of those rare over 50 Bernie supporters. And I was wondering what Mrs. Clinton will do to help me think about voting for her around the issues of the killing of young black men and women by police. I think that is one of the most important issues because it involves the murder of people, of black innocent people by the police.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to just give you some marching orders on these questions. We may not get to every answer because, again, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to answer all those questions. So take the one you like the best, but I think that there are two that are close to each other: how to heal the rift and how to have a deeper conversation about race, despite my own advertisement for myself. So who wants to take that?
Just give us
a deeper conversation.
Listen.
And how you heal the rift. Take those two together.
You know, I'm not necessarily convinced that I accept the framing of the question, which is, I don't always believe that it is the oppressed responsibility to heal the defect in oppressors, right? So I know that there are people out there who make this their job, and this is their vocation, this is their calling, and I applaud those people. I am not one of those people. One thing that Toni Morrison said that has always stuck with me is that one of the great effects of racism, not even necessarily the intention of it, but the effect of it, is it keeps you, there is distraction. It keeps you explaining things that do not need to be explained. And so that takes time away from your life and the people that you love and you doing your work in the world. And so for you to try to put the burden on me to try to fix a defect in you takes the energy from the work that I am supposed to do in this world.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else have a favorite response to any of the questions? Anybody?
Oh, so I actually think it's worth talking about the impact of Black Lives Matter and kind of these various reform movements that have popped up in the last couple of years, because I think we can actually see the impact of these on a society-wide level. So we see it in the nature of, say, the Democratic Party's inclusion, for example, at least on an upper level, of this idea of systemic racism, of intersectionality, right? These are ideas that wouldn't have even been uttered in other presidential campaigns that are now actually coming out in important ways. One thing I will say is that, and apparently, I mean, everyone in this room knows this, we have not seen, right, what the Republican Party can even do except to say and except to treat the very real issue of mass incarceration, of police reform as an antagonism. And as long as we see that, we're not going to see the kind of significant change or ideas on the Republican side of things.
All right, thank you. Armstrong, and briefly, because
I only want to address the gerrymandering question.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, yeah, fine. The gerrymandering question is really for incumbents. It's to ensure that they're reelected, it makes sure they don't have competition, and it makes sure that they don't really have to be accountable for the issues and accountable to the people that elect them. Gerrymandering is something that both parties get together on and decide. It should be outdated. To me, it is so polluted, it is so corrupt, and no one benefits except the elected official.
Donna, did you get the question on the killing of young black men? I think that was the final one we had in that.
You might have noticed at the convention that Secretary Clinton wanted the so-called mothers of the movement, mothers of the Black Lives Movement. She wanted to have their voices. She called upon them to speak of their children, speak of the pain, the anguish of having their kids murdered. I think that was a very poignant moment for the convention because we often don't hear from the mothers or the fathers of the deceased after the incident is over and the press is no longer covering the quote-unquote, the the conversation that ended once everybody, the media, walked off and left. I just look back in our platform. And the reason why I carry our platform is because this is the only thing that binds Hillary and Bernie supporters to fighting for injustice, fighting together on the front lines of this what I call this ever-closing conversation that we keep having about race. We cannot just have a racial conversation every time there's an incident or every time there's a shooting. We need to have this each and every day in our lives, in our communities, because that's the only way we can impact real change in this country.
Thank you. And now, Professor Bobo.
Okay, here we go. Yep. All right. Thank you very much, Charlene. I want to begin by just saying, let's thank again an amazing panel this evening. I think you've done amazing work. And by way of wrapping this up, I just want to begin in part with an observation that we all know and have been made in a number of the remarks, that America is changing. And that sense of something shifting in a big, deep, fundamental way is at work in this election. But it's not just that we're changing in some potentially quite fundamental ways, politically, economically, socially, demographically, but that this is a potential inflection point, and a quite troubling inflection point, as one party somewhat reluctantly embraces articulating a vision of what America's new, far more diverse population requires and needs, and another party that for the moment is staking its claim to power and office on a revanchist and sadly openly bigoted campaign. That's the inflection point, that's the choice, and it's a sad thing, but it's where we are. I want to hit kind of four themes. One about race and racism in the election, the mood of the electorate, quickly the specifics of Trump versus Hillary, Obama's legacy, and then the needs of the black community. On race and racism in the electorate, it's kind of always there, as many of the comments have indicated here. What varies is the intensity with which it drives what's going on, its explicitness, and its centrality to the voting process. I'll give you a quick example. In 1988, many of you will remember the Willie Horton ad that never explicitly mentioned race. Some of the commercials didn't even show the man, just gave his name. If you were doing polling data then, what did you discover? You discovered two things. First, that more voters were moving in the direction of George Bush, and secondly, the extent to which vote choice hinged on your level of racial prejudice was moving up. That's what it does in an election where someone appeals to that. It moves it to the center, it increases the potency of it, it draws out certain people. It's not always at that level of intensity. Now, why do I make that point? Two quick points, going back to something Leah said, 1964. Prior to 1964, at least for much of the post-Depression era, the platforms of the major political parties differed hardly at all with respect to race and civil rights. They had almost the same language and were interchangeable. Both parties were competing for black votes, as it were. When Barry Goldwater drew a line in the sand and began to point us in a different direction, you saw partisan alignments and rhetoric start to move in a fundamentally different way, aligning parties with race and the political process in some much larger sense. Let's flash ahead to 2012. In the 2012 election, remember, there were a lot of people who were convinced Romney was just going to walk in and get elected. That this thing that happened in 2008, the election of a black man named Barack Hussein Obama, was some kind of freak accident, the final product of the failed Bush presidency, right? But no, it was replicated. There was a durable coalition behind this black man in the White House. What did we see after that? We get the 2014 reaction, which I sat on this panel and characterized as a white riot in American politics. You get this ultra turnout of angry people who make sure they get the Senate again, who make sure the margin in the House is wider, right? And that reaction is now kind of culminating in Trump. So let's finish with Trump. Charles said it better than I ever could. Donald Trump is the absolute final reaping of what the Republican Party has been sowing for more than 40 years. So they're really, it's totally inappropriate to attempt to separate him from the party. You know the phrases: Richard Nixon, 68, Southern Strategy, Law and Order; Ronald Reagan, 1980, welfare queens, strapping young bucks buying steaks with welfare stamps; George H.W. Bush, Willie Horton. It goes on and on and on down the line. If you decide to dedicate much of your political strategy to divisive, racial-coded engagements in the political process, Donald Trump is the base you've built over the last 40 years. And exactly as Armstrong and others point out, he wiped the slate. He wiped the slate. Now, part of what's astonishing about this is that he started out on an overtly racist note. And almost no political commentators initially said that. The man walked up to a microphone, said, "I'm running for president of the United States because these murderous and rapist Mexicans are ruining our country." And it got worse. The troubling thing about America in the moment is that my friend Armstrong is right about one other thing. If the guy were just normal, he'd be at least even with Hillary in the polls right now. This is what ought to scare you all. If he hadn't, out of petty egotism, denounced a Gold Star family, if he hadn't, out of irresponsible bursts of remarks, called the President of the United States the founder of ISIS, if he hadn't, out of, again, gargantuan ego, refused to endorse his own party's Speaker of the House for re-election, this guy would be a frighteningly powerful force in this. And this is why I say it's an inflection point, and this is why we cannot view Donald Trump as some accident that has happened in 2016. He is unambiguously the fulfillment of what this party has been cultivating for 40 solid years. Now, let's quickly talk about the mood of the electorate. And this is part of Trump's success, and it was part of Bernie's success, and I'm going to say frankly, it's absolutely part of what Hillary missed until Bernie wouldn't let go. People are angry. People are frustrated. People are feeling closed out and screwed. Now, that gets inflected in different ways. It means one thing to young black people. It means another to a 65-year-old white man in Texas, okay? But they're all angry. They're angry at where they are in the economy as we've watched middle-class income stagnate and standard of living stagnate and get the real profound material worry that you're just not passing on a better world to your kids. They're upset at the level of partisan stagnation in government and that we can't seem to get anything done on critically important and obvious issues, especially over the last 4 years, which I will characterize as an obstinate anti-Obama racism that has dominated the House and Senate of the United States of America. Epitomized by the refusal of a Republican leadership to even hold hearings on a legitimate Supreme Court nominee. So yes, the mood of the electorate is frustrated and angry, and people are mobilized in different ways to try to do something, specifically Trump versus Hillary. This panel has replicated something, again, that ought to worry us. 80% of our dialogue is about Donald Trump. That's his power to dominate the scene and the stage. But it's also part of the failing of the Democrats, that in a room where we want to talk about issues of concern to Black America, about voters who are anxious, we can't easily call up the message on the other side. What the heck is that? That we're at this point where that isn't transparent and isn't hitting us in the face. All right? Now, I do want to stand together, but I want to know what that means in terms of getting somebody some jobs. I want to know what that means in terms of Black Lives Matter and changing forever what constitutes legitimate use of deadly force in the United States of America. Okay? I really do want to know. Legacy of Barack Obama. You know, as Donna pointed out, we're all going to be really sad people in a short few months. Because when Barack and Michelle step off the stage, it's a different world, man. It's a different world. And my buddy Skip and I had the pleasure of attending a dinner at the White House with all the African heads of state. And at the end of the evening, I'll never forget the moment. I want to share this with you because it's very powerful. Barack said, well, the conference continues tomorrow. We've all got work to do. But as you walked into the room, you saw we put out a dance floor here. And Michelle insisted we couldn't hold a big meeting in the summer and not have a party. And you saw the band out there. And before he finished speaking, they brought up Al Green. And he said, let's all go dance. And I swear to you, 500 people dancing with the President of the United States. That's a beautiful moment. We're going to miss that legacy. We're going to miss Obamacare. We're going to miss a man of decency and commitment and value who called forth an enormous number of positive things in this country. And there's always this claim that he didn't speak to the needs of Black America. Well, I think it's obvious enough he had to do it quietly. Because you see what happens when he did it quietly. They won't let the legislation go anywhere. They won't let anything positive happen. What the heck was he supposed to do? Beat Mitch McConnell with a club? I mean, it's unclear to me what those on the left, especially the black left who want to go after him, what in the heck could he have done differently? And the big thing is you're so busy getting a microphone criticizing him, you miss the positive stuff he did do. Have you read the report the Justice Department did on Ferguson, which brought down the mayor and police commissioner in that city? Have you read the report he did on Philadelphia? Have you read the one that just came out on Baltimore? If we had a serious organizational thread in Black America, we could hold those people accountable today. Because Obama said, build the record, prove it. He built the record and proved it. Somebody else got to move on this now. And where are we in the response to that circumstance? So I don't want to give in to pessimism. The good news is the other day, Donald Trump reorganized his campaign. He brought in this guy from the Breitbart Network. It looks like he's going to triple down on idiocy, on letting, he's going to let Trump be Trump. And I say, go for it, dude, because even if the Democrats never figure out a message, there's only about 35% of the public that's totally bought into Trump being Trump. And so we're going to survive this moment, because I love my old quote. You know, where's my favorite quote if I can find it? I'll let it go, because Charlene thinks I've talked for too long. But yes. Thank you all very much for engaging in this issue, and y'all get to work.
Thank you all. I will just close as you stand by saying that for all of the pessimism we've heard on this stage today, the fact that all of you are here to hear a panel discussing race and the race to the White House gives me hope and encouragement that we're going to keep America as great as it always was. Thank you.